Imagine someone surviving a violent car crash or returning from war only to find themselves trapped in constant fear, nightmares, and anxiety. That's PTSD. It's more common than many people realize, affecting over 12 million U.S. adults every year. PTSD doesn't just impact soldiers, it affects abuse survivors, accident victims, first responders, and even children. My goal today is to explore PTSD through a psychological lens, to understand its symptoms, history, and the science behind it. PTSD is a mental health condition triggered by experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event. Recent neuroscience has revealed what trauma does to the brain. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. The hippocampus, which helps with memory and context, actually shrinks. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thinking, becomes less active. In simpler terms, the brain gets stuck in survival mode. This helps to explain why someone with PTSD might feel like they're in danger, even in safe environments. From a cognitive psychology perspective, trauma disrupts how memories are processed. People often form deeply negative beliefs about themselves and the world, like I'm not safe or I'll never recover. In this image, published by psychology expert J.D. Bremner, we can see the clear difference between the effects of PTSD on the brain's hippocampus and amygdala. To better understand PTSD, let's break down its symptoms into 4 key categories. First is intrusion. This includes flashbacks, nightmares, or unwanted memories that feel like reliving the trauma all over again. Second is avoidance. People may go out of their way to avoid places, people, or even thoughts that remind them of the event. Third is a cluster of negative changes in thoughts or mood. This can look like guilt, shame, loss of interest in things they once enjoyed, or feeling emotionally numb and disconnected from others. Lastly, there's hypoarousal, which can include being constantly on edge, easily startled, having trouble sleeping, or outbursts of anger. For a PTSD diagnosis, these symptoms must persist for over a month and significantly interfere with daily life. It's also important to know that triggers, which can be sounds, smells, places, or even emotions, can bring these symptoms rushing back. PTSD may seem like a modern diagnosis, but its roots go back thousands of years. Ancient Greek and Roman texts describe soldiers who return from war with symptoms we now recognize as trauma responses. During World War I, the term shell shock was used to describe soldiers who froze under pressure, had tremors, or collapsed emotionally. In World War II, the term changed to combat fatigue. And while psychology was beginning to recognize emotional strain, the stigma was still strong. It wasn't until the Vietnam War that psychologists began to fully understand the long-lasting impact of trauma. Veterans returned home struggling, and the public began demanding answers. Finally, in 1980, PTSD was officially included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM-3. This was a turning point. It legitimized the condition and opened the door to research, treatment, and education. To better understand what PTSD can look like in the real world, let me share the story of Daniel, a U.S. Army veteran whose experience with trauma and recovery highlights the psychological depth of this disorder. Daniel joined the military at 22. He had always wanted to serve, and after basic training, he was deployed overseas to a combat zone. For months, he lived in a high-stress environment, unpredictable and dangerous. He witnessed intense violence, lost friends in ambush, and narrowly survived multiple attacks himself. But at the time, he stayed focused. He followed orders, he pushed through the fear, and when his deployment ended, Daniel returned home to a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar. At first, everything seemed fine. Friends and family celebrated his return, but inside, Daniel wasn't okay. He had trouble sleeping, Loud noises made him jump. Fireworks, cars backfiring, even kids yelling. He'd go into a panic without knowing why. The nightmares came next. Vivid, graphic dreams of gunfire, explosions, screams. He'd wake up in a sweat, heart racing, disoriented. He'd often felt like he was still back in the desert. Daniel started avoiding anything that reminded him of his deployment. He stopped watching the news. He avoided military movies. He even avoided friends from his old unit, afraid they'd bring up things he didn't want to remember. This is avoidance, another core PTSD symptom. After 6 months of trying to tough it out, Daniel hit a breaking point. One day, after not leaving the house for nearly a week, his sister convinced him to talk to a VA therapist. The psychologist at the VA confirmed what Daniel had suspected. He had PTSD. She described how the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear and survival, was overactive in people with PTSD. The hippocampus, which helps us distinguish between past and present, was struggling, and the prefrontal cortex, which controls logical thinking and emotional regulation, was underengaged. This case study is just one example of what PTSD can look like in someone's daily life. There is also exciting progress in treatment. For example, MDMA-assisted therapy is currently in phase 3 clinical trials and showing promising results for trauma processing. Virtual reality therapy is also being used to help veterans gradually face and reprocess traumatic memories in a controlled, visual environment. Other approaches include ketamine, brain stimulation, and even psychedelic-assisted therapy, all aiming to help the brain rebuild healthier patterns. Finally, this research is shaping public health. Schools, hospitals, and even law enforcement are beginning to adopt trauma-informed care models, recognizing that behaviors often stem from past trauma rather than personal failure.